It was the Monday morning briefing, and Marcus Webb stood against the back wall of the conference room the way he always did. Hands folded, shoulders rounded. A man built more like a retired mailman than a security professional. Someone on the executive team had projected a slide titled Personnel Optimization, Executive Protection Division, and there, halfway down a list of names next to headshots of sharp-jawed men in tactical black, was Marcus's photo. He was wearing a cardigan in it. Nobody could explain why. "No offense to Marcus," said Priya Anand, the chief of staff, not looking at Marcus. "But if we're serious about the Singapore expansion, we're going to be in rooms with people who take security seriously. We need someone who looks like a threat, not someone who looks like he's going to offer you a butterscotch candy." A ripple of laughter went around the table. Marcus said nothing. He never did. He had a way of receiving a room's opinion of him the way a stone receives rain. Absorbing nothing, changing nothing, simply enduring until the weather passed. Elena, 34 years old and CEO of a company she'd built out of a dorm room idea into a $12 billion data infrastructure firm, found herself glancing at him instead of the slide. Marcus had been assigned to her 8 months ago, after her previous bodyguard left to have a baby with his husband in Portland. In that time, Marcus had driven her to 400 meetings, waited outside 1,000 doors, and said perhaps 200 words to her in total. He was polite. He made bad coffee, the kind that came out the color of weak tea no matter how many scoops he used. He carried her bags without being asked and stood exactly 6 feet behind her at every public event, close enough to matter, far enough not to loom. He was, by every visible measure, exactly what Priya said he was: harmless. The joke had been building for weeks before that meeting. Someone had started calling him the substitute teacher in a group chat Elena wasn't supposed to know about but did, because Priya had once accidentally screen-shared it during a slow Friday call. Someone else had bet a junior analyst $20 that Marcus couldn't run a single flight of stairs without stopping. Nobody had actually tested the theory. It was easier and more fun to imagine it than to check. "He stays," Elena said, surprising even herself. Priya blinked. "Elena, he stays. Table it." Elena closed her laptop, a habit that ended meetings whether anyone else was ready or not. She didn't look at Marcus as she said it, and she told herself later that she'd done it out of stubbornness. A refusal to let her own executive team bully a quiet man out of a job over how he looked in a cardigan. It would be months before she let herself wonder if some older, more careful part of her had noticed something the slide couldn't capture. The way Marcus's eyes moved when he entered a room, cataloging exits before he'd cataloged faces. 3 weeks later, the company held its annual leadership retreat at a lodge in the mountains outside Aspen. 40 executives, 12 board members, and a security detail that, thanks to Priya's quiet campaigning, now numbered 6 sharp-jawed men in tactical black and 1 aging man in a windbreaker who carried Elena's bag without being asked. The retreat existed, officially, to align the company's 5-year strategy. Unofficially, it existed because a Singapore-based conglomerate called Halcyon Dynamics had spent 11 months trying to acquire Elena's company through conventional means. A hostile bid, a whisper campaign to spook her board, a lawsuit over a patent that everyone including Halcyon's own lawyers knew was baseless, and had failed every time. Elena had turned down 3 offers in the past year alone, each more aggressive than the last, and the 4th had come with something new folded into the fine print. A clause suggesting that if she wouldn't sell the company, perhaps someone would eventually convince her to sell herself out of it. Priya had raised the clause in a closed session with the board 2 days before the retreat, sliding a printed copy across the table with the specific paragraph highlighted in yellow. "This isn't corporate language," she'd said. "This is a threat wearing a corporate language costume." The board's lawyer had disagreed, called it aggressive but standard, the kind of thing lawyers wrote to see what would stick. Elena had sided with the lawyer, mostly because the alternative, believing that a company with offices in 9 countries was quietly threatening to have her hurt, felt too large and too strange to hold on to while also finalizing a keynote about quarterly growth targets. She had filed it away instead, the way people file away the sound of a floorboard creaking in a house they've decided not to think of as haunted. Nobody had taken the clause seriously enough. That was the mistake. On the second night of the retreat, Elena excused herself from the closing dinner early, exhausted from 2 days of forced enthusiasm about synergy metrics, and walked the gravel path back to her cabin with Marcus a few steps behind her, as always. The mountain air smelled like wood smoke and pine. Somewhere below the ridge, an owl called twice and went quiet. "You didn't say much at dinner," Elena said, mostly to fill the silence. "Wasn't much worth saying," Marcus said. "Priya thinks I keep you around out of pity. Priya's not wrong to wonder." Elena laughed, surprised. It was the longest sentence she'd heard him string together in a month. "Do you ever get tired of it? The jokes?" "I got tired of things like that a long time ago," Marcus said. "Being underestimated stopped costing me anything a while back. Mostly it just saves me the trouble of introductions." "That's a strange thing to say. Strange things are usually the true ones. People just don't ask about them enough to find out." She was about to ask him what he meant. She never got the chance to decide what to ask next. When Marcus stopped walking, he didn't grab her arm. He didn't shout. He simply stopped, the way a man stops when he hears a sound that doesn't belong, and something in the stillness of his body made Elena stop too. "Cabin," he said quietly. "Now. Behind me." She didn't argue. Later she would try to explain to people what had made her obey a man she'd known for 8 months without question. A man who spent his days carrying her garment bag and holding elevator doors, and she would never find the words. It wasn't his tone. It was something underneath it. A stillness that had nothing soft in it at all. For men came out of the treeline. They moved like professionals, which was the first thing that told Elena this was not a robbery gone wrong or a drunk fan who'd wandered off the resort trail. They fanned out instead of clustering, the way people do when they've drilled a formation until it no longer requires thought. 2 carried what looked, in the low light, like collapsible batons. The other 2 had their hands inside jackets in a way that suggested something heavier. None of them spoke. That, more than anything, terrified her. Men on a job don't waste breath on threats. They only speak when speaking is part of the plan, and nothing about the 4 shapes closing in through the pines suggested a plan that included conversation. For a fraction of a second, Elena registered the strangeness of it all with a kind of detached clarity. The way the porch light caught the treeline, the way her own heartbeat seemed to arrive a half-second behind everything her eyes were reporting, the absurd, useless thought that she still hadn't finished her wine. Then the detachment broke, and fear arrived all at once, cold and total, and she understood that she was about to watch something happen to her that she had no way of stopping. What happened next took 11 seconds. Elena knew this later only because the lodge's exterior camera caught the whole thing at the edge of its frame, and investigators would replay it so many times that she eventually memorized the timestamp down to the frame. Marcus didn't run. He didn't shout for help, though help, the 6 sharp-jawed men in tactical black, was 400 yards away at the dinner, drinking a Malbec someone had chosen to match the evening's keynote theme. He stepped toward the nearest attacker instead of away from him, which broke whatever choreography the man had rehearsed. His hand found the man's wrist before the baton finished its swing, and something happened to that wrist that made the man drop to his knees without a sound, as though his legs had simply been switched off. The second man came from the side. Marcus turned into him rather than away, using the man's own momentum to put him face-first into a low stone wall bordering the path. The third and fourth came together, and this was the part the investigators watched over and over, because Marcus's economy of motion didn't look like self-defense. It looked like something else, something with a name and a doctrine and a training manual, none of which existed anymore officially in any database they searched. The third man swung a baton in a wide arc meant to close distance and force a retreat. Marcus stepped inside the arc instead of away from it, close enough that the weapon's momentum became useless, and drove the heel of his palm into the man's sternum with a sound that Elena would hear in her sleep for a week afterward. Not loud, not dramatic, just final, like a door closing somewhere in a large house. The fourth man had time to draw the heavier weapon from his jacket, and for one suspended half-second Elena was certain she was about to watch Marcus die in front of her. Certain enough that she opened her mouth to scream a warning that never made it out. Marcus was already moving. He closed the gap before the weapon fully cleared the jacket, redirected the man's arm upward and past his own shoulder, and the mechanism came apart in his hands with the unhurried competence of a man field-stripping a rifle he'd cleaned 10,000 times before, the pieces falling into the gravel almost gently, as though he were setting down groceries rather than disarming a gun. By the time the fourth man hit the ground, unconscious, with his own weapon in pieces beside him. Marcus was breathing hard but not fast, standing in a loose stance with his hands slightly open at his sides, scanning the tree-line for a fifth man who wasn't there. The whole clearing had gone silent except for the wind moving through the pines and, somewhere down the ridge, that owl calling a third time, unbothered, as if nothing in the world had changed. Elena had not moved from the cabin doorway. She realized she was still holding her wine glass. It hadn't spilled. "Are you hurt?" Marcus said. Not a question. A checklist item. "No," Elena said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Marcus, what was that?" He looked at her for a long moment, the first time she would realize later that he had ever really looked at her instead of scanning past her toward whatever threat might be coming, and something crossed his face that might have been regret. "My job," he said, and went to check the men on the ground for weapons. The 4 men were, according to the passports found on 2 of them and the fingerprints run on all 4, contractors, not employees of any company, but a loose network of ex-military operators who took assignments through intermediaries, no questions asked, cash on delivery. None of them would talk in any way that led anywhere useful. The trail, such as it was, went cold at a shell company registered in the Caymans, 3 lawyers removed from anything resembling halcyon dynamics, though everyone in the room understood exactly whose fingerprints weren't on the paperwork. What interested the FBI far more than the 4 unconscious men was the 5th party in the story. The bodyguard who'd put them there. Marcus's employment file, the one the security firm had provided when he was hired 8 months earlier, listed 19 years of experience, 3 prior corporate clients, and an honorable discharge from the Army after 11 years of service. It was a good file. It was also, an agent named Delacroix informed Elena over an uncomfortable cup of coffee 3 days after the incident, mostly fiction. "The Army discharge is real," Delacroix said. "The 11 years of service is real. What's not in the file is what he did for most of those 11 years. She slid a folder across the table, thin, mostly black bars. "This is as much as I'm allowed to show you, and honestly it's more than I should. Your man was attached to a unit that doesn't have a name anymore. It didn't have much of one when it existed, either a joint task force, small, deniable, used for things that needed doing quietly in places we weren't supposed to be. It was shut down after an operation in 2003 went sideways badly enough that 3 governments had to pretend it never happened. Most of the people in that unit either don't talk about it or aren't around to." Delacroix stirred her coffee, though she hadn't put anything in it. An old habit of hers Elena would notice again in later meetings, always at the moments when she was deciding how much more to say. "I've been doing this a long time," she went on. "I've read a lot of files with black bars in them, and most of the men behind those bars want you to know, eventually, one way or another, what they used to be. There's a kind of pride under the secrecy, even when the secrecy is real. Your man isn't like that. Everything about the way he's built his life since says he'd have been perfectly happy if this had never come out at all. That's rarer than you'd think. And it usually means whatever happened in those 11 years left a mark he's still working around." "But Marcus is around," Elena said. "Marcus is around," Delacroix agreed. "And Marcus, as far as I can tell, has spent the last 20 years trying very hard to be a man who carries garment bags for a living. I don't know why. That's not really my department. My department is making sure whoever sent those 4 men doesn't try again. And now that they know what your bodyguard actually is, I'd guess they're rethinking their approach." Elena turned the folder over without opening it further. "You're saying I should be worried?" "I'm saying," Delacroix said carefully, "that the people who hired those 4 men just found out the hard way that Marcus Webb is not the soft target they thought he was. Some people, when they learn that, back off. Some people get more determined. I don't know which kind you're dealing with yet." Elena left the meeting with the folder unopened on the passenger seat of her car for the entire drive back to the office, unable to decide whether reading it would feel like protecting herself or like trespassing on the one part of Marcus's life he had never once offered her. She left it in a locked drawer for 3 days before she finally opened it, and when she did, most of what she found was exactly what Delacroix had warned her it would be. Black bars, redacted names, a scattering of dates that meant nothing without the context around them. The only line that survived the censors in full was a single sentence buried in a commendation report, dated some 20 years earlier, that read, Sergeant Webb's actions preserved the lives of the remaining unit at what the review board can only describe as extraordinary personal cost. Nothing else on the page explained what the cost had been. Elena read the sentence 4 times and then put the folder away and didn't take it out again. Priya found Elena in the empty conference room the morning after the story broke internally, standing at the window with her arms crossed, looking, for the first time since Elena had known her, genuinely rattled. "I need to say something," Priya said. "And I need you to let me say all of it before you respond." Elena nodded. "I called him a teddy bear in a meeting. I put his photo on a slide next to men who look like recruiting posters, and I said, in front of 11 people, that he wasn't scary enough for Singapore." Priya's voice was tight, controlled in the specific way she got when she was trying very hard not to cry in a workplace. "And it turns out the reason he doesn't look scary is that he spent 11 years being the scariest person in whatever room he was in, and decided he never wanted to be that again, and I mocked him for succeeding at it." She pressed her palms flat against the table. "I keep thinking about what would have happened at that retreat if he actually had been reassigned. If I'd gotten my way." "You didn't get your way," Elena said. "That's the part that matters. It shouldn't have been close." "No," Elena agreed. "It shouldn't have." She didn't offer Priya any more comfort than that because she didn't think Priya wanted it, and because some part of her agreed that the discomfort was doing useful work. Priya nodded once, sharply, and left the room without another word. And the next quarter's performance review process quietly added a line, at Priya's own insistence, about evaluating protection staff on demonstrated competence rather than appearance. Nobody outside the executive team ever knew why. Marcus did not tell Elena about the operation itself for a long time, not in any complete way, and when the memory did surface, not as a story he chose to tell but as something that simply rose up, uninvited, while he sat cleaning his sidearm in the equipment room. It came to him the way it always did, in fragments that refused to arrange themselves into anything as clean as a narrative. He was 29. It was a compound outside a city he still couldn't say the name of out loud without his jaw tightening, and the operation had gone from routine to catastrophic in the space of about 90 seconds. The way these things did, the plan dissolving the moment reality declined to cooperate with it. There had been a call to make. Pull back and lose the objective, or push forward and risk 2 men who weren't supposed to be exposed at all. He'd made the call in the time it takes to inhale. 2 men lived because of it. 1 man, a translator who was never supposed to be within a mile of the compound and was there anyway because someone else's mistake had put him there, did not. Marcus had carried that math for 20 years the way other men carry old injuries. Not constantly, not visibly, but always, a weight that changed how he stood even when nobody was looking. He never told Elena the translator's name. He'd sworn, a long time ago, that he would carry that alone, and some promises, he decided, were worth keeping even after everyone who could release you from them was gone. She found Marcus in the lodge's equipment room that evening, methodically cleaning and reholstering a sidearm she hadn't known he carried, laid out on a towel with the unhurried precision of a man performing a ritual he'd done 10,000 times. He didn't look up when she came in. "You should be resting," he said. "I want to know who you are." He was quiet long enough that she thought he might simply not answer, that she'd get the same wall of silence she'd gotten for 8 months, the stone-absorbing rain. But he set the towel down and, for the first time since she'd known him, actually sat, lowering himself into a folding chair with the careful economy of a man who'd learned young to save his energy for things that mattered. "I was 22, he said. "When I got pulled into something I didn't understand and couldn't get out of once I did. It doesn't matter what it was called. It doesn't exist anymore on paper. I spent 11 years doing things I was told mattered, for people who told me I'd never be able to talk about any of it, and by the time I was 33 I'd stopped being able to tell whether that was true because it needed to be secret or because it needed to be forgotten." He looked at his hands. "There was an operation. People died who weren't supposed to. Some of them were ours. I made a call in about 4 seconds that I've spent 20 years making again. Slower, in my head, every night trying to find the version where it comes out different. It never does. And after that, I decided I was done being someone whose job depended on being fast and sure in 4 seconds. I wanted a life where the stakes were small enough that being wrong didn't cost anyone their family. I drove trucks for a while. I did security for a mall in Ohio. Eventually a friend from the old days who'd gone into corporate protection called me and said there was a client who needed someone quiet, someone who didn't look like the kind of person people write slides about. He almost smiled. I told him that sounded fine. Elena thought about 8 months of bad coffee and held elevator doors, of a man who had never once, in all that time, let a single detail slip that would have told her any of this. You could have told me, she said. When Priya wanted you gone, you could have said something. Telling you would have meant becoming the thing again, Marcus said. The thing on the slide, but a different slide. The scary competent one instead of the harmless one. Either way, I stop being a person to people and start being a function. I've been a function before. I didn't want to be one again. He picked the sidearm back up, resumed cleaning it, and for a moment Elena thought that was the end of the conversation. Then he added quietly, You let me stay when she wanted me gone. You didn't know anything about what I could do. You just didn't think it was fair. It wasn't. No, Marcus agreed. It wasn't. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Halcyon Dynamics did not send another team. Whether that was Delacroix's doing, or the FBI's quiet visit to a boardroom in Singapore that never made the news, or simply the calculation of men who'd learned that Elena Cho's harmless bodyguard was neither harmless nor, any longer, a secret Elena never fully found out. The acquisition attempt was formally withdrawn 6 weeks later, folded into a press release about strategic realignment that fooled no one who'd been paying attention. What surprised Elena more than Halcyon's retreat was Marcus's. He came to her office on a gray Tuesday in October, in the same windbreaker he always wore, and asked, not requested through Priya, not filed a form, but asked, standing in her doorway like a man asking permission for something he already expected to be refused, for reassignment. You're leaving, Elena said. Not the company. Just you. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she'd never seen him make before, the first crack of nerves she'd ever witnessed in him. Everybody on your floor knows now what I used to be. It's in the story people tell about the retreat, the one where the quiet bodyguard turns out to be some kind of ghost soldier. I hear them tell it in the break room. They don't say it to be cruel. They just can't help finding it interesting. He looked at her, and there was something almost apologetic in it. I can't do the job the way it needs doing if I'm the story instead of the wall. A good bodyguard is furniture. Nobody watches furniture to see what it'll do. I'd rather train someone new who can start as furniture than keep being the interesting one. Elena sat with that for a long moment. She thought about the slide with his photo on it, the cardigan, the laughter. She thought about 11 seconds on a gravel path that no camera had fully caught. She thought about a man who had spent 20 years trying to disappear into ordinariness, only to be dragged, once, briefly, and completely against his will, back into being exactly what he'd worked so hard to stop being. Where do you want to go? She asked. If not away from the company. Training division, Marcus said. Teach the sharp-jawed men in tactical black how to actually notice a tree lean before something comes out of it. Nobody watches the man running the drills. He gets to just be the guy with the whistle. Elena almost laughed. You'll be terrible at PowerPoint. I was terrible at PowerPoint the whole time I worked for you, Marcus said. You never once complained. No, Elena said. I didn't. He left her office the way he'd entered every room for 8 months. Quietly, without ceremony, closing the door with more care than it needed. 6 months later, Elena visited the training facility the company kept an hour outside the city, ostensibly to review the budget for the new protection curriculum, actually because she wanted to see once what Marcus's life looked like now that nobody was writing slides about it. She found him in a gymnasium that smelled of rubber mats and old coffee, standing at the edge of a course laid out with cones and blacked-out windows, watching a class of 6 recruits. Sharp-jawed, tactical black recruits, the exact kind Priya had once wanted in his place. Fail, one after another, to notice an instructor's assistant walking a slow loop around the building's perimeter in plain clothes. You're supposed to see her, Marcus told them, not unkindly, after the 4th recruit walked past the window without a flicker of recognition. She's not hiding. She's just not interesting to look at, which is the whole trick. The people who mean you harm rarely look like the ones in the recruiting posters. Most of the time they look like the guy nobody bothered to notice. He caught Elena's eye across the gym and, for the first time she could remember, Something close to a real smile crossed his face. "Present company excluded, obviously," he said to the recruits, nodding toward her without further explanation, and the recruits, who had no idea what he meant, laughed anyway because it seemed like the kind of thing you were supposed to laugh at. Afterward, walking her to her car, Marcus admitted that the reassignment had turned out better than he'd let himself hope. "Nobody in that gym has ever seen the file," he said. "To them, I'm just the guy with the whistle who's annoyingly right about trillions. It's the first job in 20 years where being right is the whole point of me, instead of a secret underneath the point of me." "Do you miss it?" Elena asked. "Being the wall?" "Sometimes," Marcus admitted. "I was good at being furniture. There's a kind of peace in being furniture that people who've never had to be anything else don't understand." He opened her car door for her out of old habit, then caught himself and laughed, a short, surprised sound she'd never once heard from him in 8 months of bad coffee and quiet mornings. "Old reflexes," he said. "Some things don't retrain easily." Elena drove back to the city with the windows cracked, the mountain air giving way slowly to the noise of the highway, and found herself thinking not about Halcyon or the board or the $12 billion company waiting for her on the other end of the drive, but about a man who had spent 2 decades trying to disappear into the background of other people's lives, and who had finally found a place where disappearing wasn't a wound he was managing but a skill he got to teach, out loud, on purpose, to people who would never know what it had cost him to learn it. She kept his old employee photo, the one from the security binder, the one with the cardigan. She never told anyone why, and nobody, not Priya, not the board, not the recruits who spent their mornings failing to spot a woman in plain clothes walking slow loops around a gymnasium, ever asked.